Hello everyone, Mrs. Hanvey here, just recording this video to give you a little bit more extra help on graphing polynomials. Alright, so the first thing is I want to refresh your memory on the steps. So if you ever get stuck, go back to these in your notes and start with step 1. And step 1 is to find your x-intercepts and then to go and find your y-intercepts. So remember, x-intercepts is where it crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. And so to find the x-intercepts, that's where you take your factors. So let's say we had this as our factor. We just take that x plus 1, set it equal to 0. We want to know what would cause this whole thing to be 0. Well, subtract 1, subtract 1. If x is negative 1, that causes this whole thing to be 0 because negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So that's your goal, is to find where y would equal 0. That's why we take this thing and equal to 0. And to find your y-intercept, you're going to plug in x equals 0 into your equation. And so here we would make the x 0. So this would be for the y-intercept of that. You would take that and put 0 plus 1 squared, which would just be 1 squared, which we know is just 1. And so that's the difference between finding the x-intercept and the y-intercept. The x-intercept, you set it equal to 0 and solve. The y-intercept, you replace x with 0. All right, so now I want to talk about the multiplicities, or how do you know if it bounces or crosses the x-axis. So let me just show you a quick picture of how you can tell whether or not it's going to bounce or cross. So I'm going to go ahead and draw these x-intercepts. So I know it says it crosses at negative 1. So I'm going to put a big dot there at negative 1 and positive 7, because 7 minus 7 would make that 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So somewhere right there. Make that 0. All right. So if the power on that factor is even, so we're talking about that little tiny power at the top. If this is even, so if it has an even power, it's going to bounce. Even powers means it's going to bounce. So right here, I'm going to put a little b because I know here it's going to bounce because it has x plus 1 squared. It's all about that power on it. And so bouncing means, doesn't matter where we're coming from, but it's going to hit it and bounce back. That would be an example of something that bounces. Where here at 7, the power on that, put it over here, so we have x minus 7 to the third power. Since that power is odd, we know it's going to cross. That means it's going to actually go and cross the x-axis. So this is an example of cross. So remember, bounce hits it and goes back down. And then across would mean it would just go cross over to the other side. It would actually get to the positive up here versus down there. All right, and then the end behavior, if we know whatever number is in front, if it is positive, it's going to go to the top right. If it was negative, it's going to go to the bottom right. And then you just work backwards through your problem. All right, let's do one together then. All right, so we're going to sketch the graph of this polynomial. First, find your x-intercepts. So we're going to look at this factor, and this factor to find our x-intercepts. So we already know, technically, it's negative 1x squared equals 0. You can do all this work, but hopefully you can just tell by looking at it that the number that's going to make this 0 is going to be just 0. And so you don't have to do all this work. You should be able to tell if we have an x in front and it's not written as a factor or a binomial, then it's just going to be 0. And then we have x minus 4 equals 0, add 4, x equals 4. And then x plus 3 equals 0, x equals negative 3. So you should be able to just see, oh, -3 plus 3 makes this 0, so that's why it's an x-intercept. Now we're going to look at the power. Notice how this has a degree of 2 or a power of 2, and this one has a power of 2. I don't care about what actual number it is. I know that this has a squared and that has a squared, so it's going to bounce at 0, and it's going to bounce at 4, but this has a power of 1, which is odd, so it's going to cross at -3. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those. So that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and -3. 1, 2, 3, -3. So I just did all of my x-intercepts. And I know this one bounces. I like to put little b. This one bounces. This one crosses. Okay, now the y-intercept, it's pretty easy for this one because if you plug in 0 for all of your x's, that would be -1 times 0 squared times 0 minus 4 squared times 0 plus 3 squared. That becomes 0. This becomes -4 squared. This becomes 3 squared. All this is just going to be 0. And we already knew that because the x-intercept was 0. So the x-intercept and the y-intercept is the same thing there. All right, now the end behavior. So we're going to look at the leading coefficient. That would be the number in the front here. It's a -1. Since it's negative, we know it's going to go down here in a negative direction. And then we're going to look at our degree. So this has 2 x's, this has 2 x's, and this one has 1 x. So you multiply x squared times x squared times x. You just add all those powers. So this one has 2, this one has 2, and this one has 1. So that has a degree of 5. Since it's odd, it's going to go in opposite direction. So we know it's going to end over here. Odd is opposite. And now we're just going to connect all the information we know. We know we're going to start down here. We're going to hit this number, bounce back, have to come back, bounce back, and cross. And that is a rough sketch of how to graph this function. I know it is possible that this goes down even more, or this goes really shallow, but we know it's going to go down in this direction somewhere. All right, so hopefully that video helps you. And if you need help, make sure you ask me in the meets. I also am going to do another example in the next video.